So we're incredibly pleased and excited to have working with Eric Mintz-Winson, who's here with us today, and a collaboration for this show, the Ojai Invitational. We've done this before with Eric, so it's a real gem to have these two artists with us in the Porch Gallery. And we are all about legacy here and tradition and storytelling and like going through the art world in this really dynamic way with newer generation and older generation, so we could not be more pleased to have this here. So the reception is from 5 to 7, so feel free to come back or hang around and meet the artists. There's more work upstairs too. There's also a piece of Natalie's in the Beto Lounge, so I want to make sure nobody misses it. And here's Heather, my partner.
So I'm just going to give a brief bio of the artist. And for those that you don't know, this is Charles and Natalie Arnoldi. Father-daughter. So Charles Arnoldi was born in Dayton, Ohio. Arnoldi attended Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles in the late 60s, which is now Cal Arts, correct?
It became Cal.
Yes.
I want you to know I'm almost deaf, so if I say something that doesn't make sense.
Oh, it's okay. We'll just talk disability.
Okay.
And by the 70s was having exhibitions at prestigious galleries across the United States. He was the recipient of the 1969 Los Angeles County Museum of Art's Young Talent Award, 2 NEA Artist Fellowships in 1974 and 1982, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Master Grant from the California Arts Council. His work is in the collections of major museums, including the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, and the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, California. Whoa. Almost straight out of breath saying that. So, Natalie Arnoldi is an artist living in Central California, trained academically as a marine biologist with a bachelor's and a master's degree from Stanford University. Arnoldi has had over 45 exhibitions worldwide. Natalie Arnoldi, is currently pursuing a PhD in marine ecology at Stanford University, studying with, is it Fiorenza? Michelle?
Rico.
Got this.
Close enough.
That's where you're
What do we do now?
So I guess I'll just start the conversation. It's going to be a conversation. I'm just going to let them talk. But I wanted to start the conversation with walking out of the room. As a father and daughter, when you see your daughters start to have an inclination to become an artist, now, is that something you're encouraging or discouraging, and when did you see it start happening?
Oh, here's the interesting thing. She grew up in a house. Katie, my wife, is also an author. She writes novels, and she's had big selling novels. And throughout, we never thought it would be, we have a son that's 30, now he's 28, and we never encouraged them to be writers or artists, because my feeling is that's the kind of thing you do only if you feel like you have to. It's not a profession. It's not something you decide, hey, I'm going to be an artist, hey, I'm going to be an author. So we weren't encouraging. However, I think we were very fortunate. We had a lot of friends that are artists and writers and people in almost every field, and they're somewhat successful in it. So they've been around people, and for me, what was really interesting, I never knew I was going to be an artist either. It's just a fluke thing that I'm here. I'm very lucky. And when I was very young, and when I moved to Los Angeles, mostly because of Gemini, the print shop, they invited all the famous artists from New York, Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, Warhol, Ellsworth Kelly, all those guys would come out, Frank Stella. And I got to meet all these guys. There weren't very many women, I know, that's the way it was. But anyway, I met all these artists, and I got along with them just as people. So to me, making art was something that just some people do it, and it seemed very natural. And Natalie and my son spent a lot of time in her room doing stuff. it was Katie who
I would
mostly.
want to be a little more specific.
Well, no, I was going to say they had limited TV time, and so they would draw and make things, and I got interested in ceramics, and it just kind of naturally grew. And the other fear I have is we've known a lot of people that are artists or whatever, and if their children go into the field, if they emulate their parents or something, it's always scary because it doesn't seem natural. But in Natalie's case, especially if you look at her work and mine, they're nothing alike. And so she has her own voice and her own drive and everything. And the fact she's doing science and art is really kind of fascinating. She's trying to save the planet, and I think that kind of, her work, like about the gas station back there, that's the gasoline automobile. There's a smog painting upstairs. She deals with all these things, and it's really kind of nice because I'm not thinking about saving the planet myself. Yeah. Now that you've talked for a while, I can get diarrhea in the mouth easily. So
Well, it's always interesting to hear you say that because yes, I was never pushed to be an artist, and yet when I got to college I was going to be a scientist, and I'd call them, I'm going to fail organic chemistry. Well, just drop out and be an artist. You'll be fine. So it's kind of amazing I made it to graduate school, but.
yeah, but that's because I thought she could pull that off if she wanted. And what you're doing is the competition and what she's doing is fierce. Anyway, so.
Well, I don't really know what to say. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Is your son also an artist?
He has a creative company. It's really interesting. He, I think, as a way of going against us, he wanted to become a billionaire. He studied economics, and he was going to go that direction. And he realized when he was graduating from college that was a little screwball. So he started a company about 7 years ago with a friend of his who was also interested in economics. And they have it's a design company, and they're doing very creative things. And I'll tell you, I'm a dinosaur. I believe in paintings and sculpture. I like hands-on work. I make all the work myself. And a lot of their stuff is, they use computers and printers and stuff, which at first I was kind of like, oh my God, it's not the right thing. However, I'm starting to appreciate this younger generation. I think David Hockney was brilliant to do the Polaroids, and he does the phone drawings and stuff. They're not my favorite things of his, but it's interesting he could go in that direction. That's sort of the direction my son's company is going in, using the new world, and I can barely use my iPhone or whatever.
So, I have to speak on this, because there's more to this story, so.
Thank you.
One thing is, growing up, Natalie started making things from the very beginning, and she wasn't encouraged or pushed. However, she did have the best art supplies of any of her friends. At one point when she was very young, suddenly we needed to pull up that rug, that carpet in her room because she painted on the floor. So she had a studio, a functioning studio in her bedroom from a very early age. And that wasn't because we were directing her there. She led the way, but we certainly facilitated it. So
it's sort of a lifestyle.
would you
Completely, and it is fun. So my brother actually is not an artist in the same sense that my dad and I are painters, but he is an artist, and he has this design company. He makes all of the original work that they then scan and they make digital art out of it. But both of us, when I was 7, I told my parents I'm going to be a shark biologist, and 21 years later, here I am doing it. And my brother wanted to be an econ major, and he studied psych and econ. And now he's an artist, so we both kind of set out in these very different trajectories, and I think it speaks to what my dad said about you're born an artist or not, you have to make things or not, and we deviated for a while, but here we are.
Well, you never deviated. You've been painting and making.
I never
things.
thought I'd be a professional artist, though.
Right.
That was never part of the plan.
Well, I never thought I'd be a professional artist. I didn't even know you could do that. I've been very lucky, I must say.
Have you collaborated on pieces?
No, but we've done some shows together.
No.
No, but, you know, we look at each other's work sometimes when it's in progress, and we have conversations just like any artist would have, you know. What do you think of that? Is that okay? You know, that kind of thing.
Dad, help! Is this done? Why doesn't it look good? There's a lot of that.
Your studio, the studios were together, so is that, and now you've moved up north, but, so I assume that would be a natural thing of, yeah, you hit a snag, and then it's so nice to have, you know, someone working around you. And it's, you know, when you have all these people in lofts with different studios in the buildings, I'm assuming it's the same thing. But when you guys start addressing it, like, do you critique his work?
Not really, but he does ask for my opinion.
You can't criticize.
But he's also so fast, by the time I look twice, he's done with the painting and moving on to the next one. But
I have a question. How did you get in, well, what made you want to save the world in a sense, and how did you think you could have an effect on that?
well, it didn't start from, I want to save the world, how can I do it? It started from a fascination with the natural world, and we went snorkeling. So my parents live in Malibu, and every year the leopard sharks breed right in front of their house. And so there was a day when we went snorkeling and there were just thousands of leopard sharks, and that was, I got out of the water and I said, I'm going to be a shark biologist. But it's impossible to be an environmental scientist or a biologist and not study climate change and overfishing and all of these other human stressors, and we're really destroying the life support system for our planet. And so it's kind of, if you get into this field, it's not really a choice. You kind of have to strive to make things better.
I'm gonna add.
This is my mother. This is
This is Katie.
Well, and so the reason for the PhD, which at this point doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, for our career's really taken off and she's showing all over the place. But with this goal in mind, I mean, she has a lot of science in her belt. She has 2 degrees, but to have a credible voice in the world, you need a PhD. And to have a really credible voice, a PhD from Stanford is going to do that. So that's, am I wrong?
I also really like school.
She didn't like school until she got to Stanford.
Well,
To have a really, really, really credible voice, you have to be an artist.
there you go. There you go.
How are you balancing your time between art and science?
So I finished my master's in 2014, and I was probably 70% in my studio and then 30% doing field work, so tagging sharks and tuna and traveling and doing science. And now, this first year has been particularly demanding, so I'm 9 to 5, I'm a PhD student, and then I go home and I paint.
Wow.
And on the weekend I paint. So it's going to be a very busy 5 years, but they balance each other well.
So when you're starting, both of you can answer that. When you're starting a new body of work, what's your inspiration? Like, you know, there's obviously the sharks, but then there's the gas stations, the chairs, the roads, the airplanes, you know, and then you have the different kind of spring drawings and the, you know, these pieces inspired by Machu Picchu. So can you speak to how, like, when you're first starting, like, if I'm going to start a new body, and what inspires it?
You better go first.
I've been talking about me for a while.
It'll take me forever to tell them all this stuff.
That's what they're
I've been doing this for 50 years, so you really want me to go first? Basically, I had no intention of being an artist. Grew up in Dayton, Ohio. I wanted to get a factory job, a graveyard shift to get double time. And I came to California. It's a long story. And once I saw California after being in Ohio, I thought I'm going back out there. And fortunately for me, some people saw some drawings I did and said, you should go to art school. And I went, you can take art in school? I didn't even know. I really literally didn't know. And so they tried to groom me to be an illustrator. And I went to Art Center for 2 weeks, and I quit because I realized that I would be using my talent to sell stuff. And so I left there and I went to Chenard, which later became Cal Arts, and I spent 8 months there. But when I got to Chenard, they told me painting and sculpture is dead. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't understand that. See, I like paintings and sculpture. I'm not sure what art is anymore, but performance and all this stuff just eluded me. So I felt a terrible pressure to make something like a painting that wasn't actually a painting. So I ended up doing screwball things like making polyurethane bags full of powder pigment. I ended up making these tree branch paintings that people really liked them, and I made some chainsaw paintings and all this other stuff. And it took me several years to realize that you don't have to do some novelty, brand new thing to be an artist. You have to be true to yourself. And so these Machu Picchu paintings, for instance, these are Katie and I, about 2 years ago, went for our 35th wedding anniversary, went to see Machu Picchu. And I'm constantly trying to, when I walk in my studio in the morning, I have as much doubt as I do confidence. I'm going, what the hell am I doing? Because I'm constantly struggling. I keep reinventing myself all the time. If people like what I'm doing, if it's selling many times, it'll force me to change stuff. I think success is a very dangerous thing in the arts because I don't want to be a one-trick pony. And when you start making stuff people like, it's very tempting to keep doing that. Anyway, so after several years of being in my studio, if in the old days when I was young, if somebody walked in my studio and said, that looks like Matisse, or that looks like Picasso, I used to consider that an insult. Now, when I'm in my studio, if I do something, they say, that reminds me of an artist, I consider it flattery because every artist that ever lived, man or woman, starting from way back, we were a group of human species that had this weird ability to think independently and strive to try to make stuff. I'm not saying it's better or worse than other people, but some of us have this capability of making something. And I realized when I was growing up as a child from a dysfunctional family that I got no love from my parents, but I could make bow and arrows really good. I could make tree houses and stuff, and I got complimented on, wow, and it made me feel good about myself because it gave me some sense of purpose. So the longer in my studio, I'm constantly trying to figure out how to make a valid painting. Am I getting too long?
Please.
Okay, I'm going to do this fast. My idea of a valid painting is I'm making an inanimate object that I've thought about in my head. It's an idea. So then I start to make that thing real. And once I start that thing, it never turns out quite the way it is in here because it's a dialogue between me and this thing. So it's a battle and it's a conversation. And I have to respect this thing because if many times I'll overdo something because I could do more anyway. What a valid painting or sculpture is an object that you've made, an inanimate object that has a life of its own. So if you made, and in my case, for instance, I've been doing this for 50 years, and so every once in a while I have some old work out in the world, and people go, hey, I really like that thing. It's still speaking to people. And what I hope is that without thinking about your reputation, who's representing you, or how much something is worth, does this object have an energy and a life of its own that makes people look at it? And I'll tell you, when I go to museums, it doesn't matter which museum I walk, and I walk through at a regular clip until I see something that attracts me. And I always walk over within arm's distance because I'm just fascinated by the detail, because that is the human part of it, okay? So I'm just trying to make good, valid paintings, and so anyway, that's what I do. And, so we went to Machu Picchu. There's some string theory pieces in here too. I didn't come up with the label string theory. Somebody thought these linear paintings those made sense. And the thing about string theory, for instance, first, every artist that ever lived, because we have a thumb, an elbow, and a shoulder and stuff, they've been doing this since the beginning of time. And supposedly, just the fact that they could draw animals and stuff made them realize also they could use their arm to make weapons and stuff. So it's all interconnected to this ability of using your body. And so I'm trying to figure out how to make valid paintings, and one day I thought to myself, okay, why don't I just get a canvas and a paintbrush and do this? Don't try to make an Arnoldi, just try to make a valid painting, making honest moves. And the second that thing comes alive, leave the thing alone. okay? So that's where the string theories, and they all go through various generations. Anyway, so Katie and I went to Machu Picchu. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but you walk into these ruins and you go, Jesus Christ, how in the hell did they cut those rocks like that and made them fit together? A grid pattern is one thing, with everything's 90-degree angles, it fits. But these people, these primitive people, I guess, but extremely sophisticated, somebody had this idea, hey, cut that rock like that, set it there and put another one and interlock all the shapes. Okay, when you're making a painting, if you're gonna make shapes, you gotta make sense out of this thing. And so I thought to myself, when I get back to the studio, I'm gonna take a piece of charcoal, draw shapes, don't overthink them, don't try to make an art, make these things interlock, and then paint them into a painting. So that's all these are, this particular group is just trying to make sense of making shapes with a paintbrush on a surface. Because all I'm trying to do is make a good painting. Okay, anyway, I could go on for hours, but take it away. Tell them about the gas chambers.
Well, I mean, I guess the biggest difference between my dad's work and mine is I'm representational and he's abstract. So the way that we choose subject material is different. But I think the ultimate goal is the same thing that he says, you want to make a painting that speaks to people. And for me, I want people to feel something, and much of my work is very ambiguous and people feel lots of different things when they see it. But if you still remember my painting 3 months later, then I've been successful in communicating that art to you. And so for me, I mean, there's something, sometimes you see an image and it's really exciting and it speaks to me and I want to make it. And then there are other things that I've encountered and thought that might make a really interesting painting, but then kind of not acted on it. But if 3 or 6 months later I'm still thinking about it, then it's a good indication that it might be a good idea. And so,
Tell them about the railroad tracks.
okay, so I've painted a lot of very different things, and to some people they seem random and unrelated, but a lot of the bodies of work have led to each other. So one of my earliest bodies of work was roads and railroad tracks in the fog. And so there are these almost abstract shapes, but very representational. And he had a museum group come through and he had one of my railroad paintings hanging in his studio. And this woman just broke down crying in front of my painting. And it was because she had a family member who had been a prisoner at Auschwitz. And so I've always tried to be very emotionally evocative with my work and kind of paint these sort of universally relatable images. But this was the first time someone had such a strong reaction and to such a specific point in history. And so I started looking at historical photographs from the Holocaust and found that I was very haunted by, when the Allies liberated each camp, they were very meticulous about going through and documenting these spaces. And aesthetically, it was around the time when I started painting the gas station paintings, and so that sort of stark architectural imagery appealed to me. But also I was thinking about how do you make a very powerful painting and connect people with a very specific period of history and make people really think introspectively about what happened. So I started looking at these historical images. I made a couple of small paintings. The first was the gas chamber at Auschwitz and a torture chamber at another camp. And then about 4 years, and then my dad and other artists responded positively to those paintings, and you should make them big, because my intention with these paintings was to create an empathic connection with these places. And so I painted the gas chambers at Auschwitz 18 feet by 8.5 feet. And I now have this body of work that is of all of these different spaces. But I think that it's a very, I felt moved to make those pieces, and I think that they're very successful in creating an emotional connection with a part of history that is very relevant to current times, and also it's an interesting time to engage with that dialogue because the last of the survivors are passing away, and so there's this question of how do we keep this narrative alive?
So you just intuited this desire to make the railroad tracks in the fog, and then it developed into something more universal?
Yeah, so the railroad tracks, I was painting these road paintings, I was making the gas station paintings. It's sort of these icons of American history and industrial revolution. I'm an environmental scientist. It's something I think about a lot. But I had never, that was not a narrative I was trying to connect with at all. But it was a really powerful moment when that woman made that association.
I think a lot of things interesting. She was painting all these airplanes and the roads, and it was a thing that, like, you didn't know if the airplane was taking off or if it was crashing. It was kind of set up a thing so the viewer participated in it and sort of made up their narrative. And that's why it was so powerful when this woman just broke down. And she had no, connection to that. And it's really nice that somebody of her generation is, because it's interesting, people her age don't think about and know about that very much. And so it was, I thought, a very powerful, good thing to do.
And so tell what's happening with those.
So I have now painted 8 of them, so it makes for a very heavy show all hanging in one room. But I've shown them with a gallery in Santa Fe, and we showed them in LA, and they're going to be in the Shelton Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's going to be showing them next year.
And in
And a couple others too, I can't remember.
It's traveling.
This show is going to travel.
I have a question, back to your the abstract, and I think you kind of answered this for me, but are you looking at something and then trying to abstract it?
No.
So you're just working.
The thing is, for instance, like the tree branch paintings I made, I was out in Malibu after a fire stealing fruit with a friend of mine, and I noticed all these trees were burned around the perimeter of the place. And the tree branches looked like abstract, the hand-drawn charcoal lines. And I thought, that's interesting, because back then, so you're not supposed to make a painting or a mark. So I thought if I took the branches, they would be the marks. So if I did something with them, it would validate them, because it's not just a mark somebody made, it's the structure also. So I started putting the tree branch paintings together, and it made total sense to me. Abstract art, I don't even know what the hell art is, and abstract art is a mystery to me. However, good abstract art speaks to people and works. And I don't do, right now, I'm always angry with the art world, because today it seems like the worst goddamn place in the world. It's like cartoon art. I think that they've dumbed art down because more people can understand it. They're looking for broader bases. And I come from a generation where you just do it. If somebody likes it, great. You don't expect them to get rich and famous, for Christ's sake. That'd be the last thing in your mind. And so for me, I think I'm an abstract artist mostly because of my age. I'm 73. And when I entered the art world, I related to, Franz Klein and de Kooning and Pollock and, Rauschenberg. And that really got me excited. I think Picasso was one of the greatest artists that ever lived, because the thing I think is most important with art is it should reflect your time on the planet, okay? And if you're painting the same paintings when you're 73 as you did when you're 40, I think you're doing it for a commercial reason. Where I think that guys like Picasso, and I really admire Frank Stella. Frank Stella could be painting black stripes today and making $80 million a painting, but he's doing these god-awful, horrible sculptures, and every once in a while the one's great. He's really smart, and he's not doing it to please the public or anything. And you can relate to this work, even though it's abstract, weird stuff, So, but I'm constantly looking for something to use. Years ago, I collected a bunch of bugs because the patterns on their backs looked interesting. Tried to incorporate it in paintings. And I'm constantly trying to find something that I can use. I admire portrait painters and landscape painters a lot, because if David Hockney gets bored, he can paint his dog. Or if he can't think of anything to do, And abstract art is very dangerous because, you think it up, you do it, and, I don't know, is it any good or not? I don't know, Sculpture is interesting too. I always thought that painting was superior to sculpture, but the truth is there's only been about 6 great sculptors and hundreds of great painters, because sculpture has the thing, if you make a piece of sculpture, if it doesn't look good from this side, maybe you walk around, it looks good from the other side, and it's real. So there's a validity. It's like the stick paintings. The sticks were the structure, but they were the drawing. If I drew that, it'd be a dumb drawing. But the fact that it was the structure, it's like architecture.
But you did draw them.
I did them too, but when architecture, when something's under construction, whether it's a little, outhouse out of 2x4s or a high-rise out of steel beams, at that stage it looks great because the structure is all validated. When they start decorating them and cladding them, most architecture goes to hell, I think. Anyway.
When you looked at above for patterns, are you looking for something that you're actually connecting with? That
I am connecting with when I make it. See, that's what I said. I
That's
have a
right.
dial.
Right, that's right.
And for me, see, I mean, okay, a painting like this one, it's all about all the stuff. And I made all these decisions, I made them and I did it, and that's it. You can like it or hate it. I mean, that's irrelevant. But when I look at paintings, I don't care if it's Van Gogh or Mir or Giacometti or sculpture or painting or something. I look at the thing and somehow it transforms me into this thing that it's okay what you do because these other people have done it too. And we're like a giant tribe or a group of humanity that's always tried to express themselves, which I guess is talking about your life through some sort of visual form, which starts with this.
If you wanted to, so say one Sunday you wanted to paint peaches. Peaches is their big Well, there are artists that have gone back and forth between abstract and
That's
figurative.
true, but see, it's never inspired, I've never felt like I needed to do that. Everything I do, I feel like I have to do it. And if I'm not doing it, I feel guilty. I work 7 days a week. I mean, I can't help it, and it's the damnedest thing. I mean, I just keep thinking, and a lot of my friends, I have a lot of older artist friends, and they go, "What the hell? Why do you make them so big? Why do you make so many?" And I just feel fortunate in a way that I still have this desire and this energy to do it. But I do question it constantly.
It's impossible to go on vacation.
How do you feel about the work once you finish it?
The thing is that, I know this sounds horrible, I like my work. And what's funny is, it's funny you say, like, they came down and borrowed paintings, and I've never seen this gallery until a couple hours ago. And I walked through here and I got to the hotel and I thought, wait a minute, where's that painting? Because they wanted to borrow this one little painting. And I came in here and said, where's that painting? I told her, it's my favorite painting out of this group. It's probably not, but I have a connection to them. And it's interesting for me to go on trips and walk back in the studio. I have a pretty big studio, and I have work up from anywhere from 1971 to brand new. And dealers hate that because it confuses clients, but my studio's not a goddamn art gallery. And I have this stuff up, and part of it is I'm constantly looking at it and, not necessarily criticizing, but seeing, does it hold up? And even though I've reinvented myself, I've made thousands of things, I can't escape myself. I'll try stuff, but I have a certain comfort zone. If I approach a big canvas, maybe it's the way I lay it out or something. And I can't get rid of that. In fact, my son and I just had a trip, and he said, why don't you work for 6 months and just try to make some ugly, horrible shit?
Do you feel like you're falling back on that?
Well, I don't.
The facility in which you can do
I
that?
don't feel like I'm holding back on anything, but I already am 6 or 8 months ahead of myself. I have stuff in the studio, but I've changed so frequently. When I look back, and a lot of times I would literally change if things got to be popular, or if a dealer came to me and said, "Would you make me a show of those?" And no. And so looking back, though, sometimes I feel like I should have probably pushed it farther. So now when I'm making stuff, I make it till I can't stand myself anymore. Like, I'm still doing the string theory things, but I kind of have a new approach on them. In fact, my wife recently said, why don't you stop making those? You made enough of them.
This question for Natalie.
Yeah, good.
When you were talking about your railroad track paintings and gas station paintings and gas chamber paintings. Do you struggle at all with representing the scale? Because I'm gathering there's no people in any of these.
Mm-mm.
So how do you give the viewer a clue as to what the scale is?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
Well, is this one of yours?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know what that is.
The
But
gas
it's really
station.
compelling.
Thank you.
That's a gas station.
So I can see it's a gas station now that you say that.
Mm-hmm.
But do you struggle with, the person, when you say you're representational, like that to me seems sort of abstract because it's missing some of those clues that would tell you what
Right.
it is. So I guess I'm just wondering if you are challenged by that, or if you go, but do you question, oh, should I put more?
Well, so it's an interesting question. So it's always interesting to me when people see paintings of mine and they'll say, oh, I thought that was a photograph, if they see something on an iPhone or something. And I think it speaks to the success of the work that I'm able to capture the feeling of the subject material. But if you really look at it, I mean, a lot of my work, I am nowhere near photorealism, but I'm not trying to capture something in photorealism. And so to me, a teacher once said to me, a successful painting takes an image and captures what's interesting about it. And so in my work, I'm not interested in the gas station paintings. I strip away all of the details that I find unnecessary to the atmosphere that I'm trying to create, if that makes sense. And so none of my work
Is atmospheric like something you would say about all the paintings along the line?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You did.
But at the same time, she's making a statement about, like, everybody here probably has a car or two. Everybody looks at cars that are using gasoline, we're having, climate problems, stuff. And so you said something like that, maybe makes people question that idea of everybody's driving gasoline-powered automobiles. And, it's, so it doesn't have to have the Union 76 logo on or Chevron or something to try to get that point across. It's not about trying to sell you a brand of gasoline.
Oh, sure. I think that you call them atmospheric resonates with me.
Thank you.
And I understand why you'd be compelled to do it.
Well,
I think they're really cool.
I think so. If you go upstairs, I did a series of smog paintings, and I started making those after. So I was a teaching assistant for an environmental science course, and we had a guest lecturer come in and talk about air quality. And he started his lecture with this slideshow of very beautiful images of what looked like cityscapes in fog. And given that I was painting fog at the time, it really appealed to me. And there are these beautiful images that become deeply disturbing when you realize that it's not fog, it's smog. And 100,000 people a year are dying in China prematurely because the air quality is so poor. And so I don't think, for me, these paintings, you go up and I think it's a beautiful painting, it's very aesthetically pleasing, and you wouldn't necessarily know just from looking at it that it's depicting smog, not fog. But I think there's something interesting about, I don't think you need to know what it's representing for it to be a successful painting, but it becomes more interesting when you learn what it actually is. So that's a Shanghai skyline in the smog. But I think you can add sort of complexity and an interesting aspect to a painting without being blatantly obvious about what your subject material is. But then if someone's interested in it, then they can learn more.
Natalie.
Yes.
So I'm very inspired by your passion for both art and environmental science. And I wanted to ask you, so what opportunities do you have or are you creating to inspire youth? Kind of like the comment that you made, Charles, like I didn't know that was a thing, that I could study art. Are you connecting with youth on the combination of those two things?
Not a huge amount, a little bit. So I'm just starting my PhD, but there are a lot of outreach opportunities, and there are a few groups at Stanford that are focused on sort of the nexus of art and science. And it's an interesting conversation because I'm sort of an anomaly in that I'm doing both, but largely separately. But I think, the way that I think about art and science is they're both creative problem solving. So the tools are different, the problems are often different, but to be a successful scientist, you have to be very creative. And to be an artist, obviously, that's what you're doing. But I think that where the most maybe useful part of what a lot of scientists can learn from artists is that, so in art you're trying to make people think or feel something, and a lot of scientists, science is inherently meant to be objective and unemotional, and a lot of scientists get really nervous about communicating their science. But if you can reframe that problem in terms of when you communicate your science, trying to make people feel something so that you can get them to enact a behavior change, because really that's, as environmental scientists, we're trying to get people to change their behavior. But without getting someone to feel something, you're not going to be, just telling people statistics doesn't make them, stop using single-use plastics or drive their car less. And so starting a dialogue around how can we approach these problems differently and maybe think more like an artist.
And encourage collaboration.
Yeah.
Natalie,
Yes.
is this a shark that you studied? A particular shark?
This is, so I did this series of great white shark paintings. So I worked in a lab for a very long time that tags great white sharks. And we tag sharks, we have 3 locations up in Northern California. And great white sharks in the Eastern Pacific are highly migratory. They spend the fall on shore, and then in the spring they migrate 1,000 miles offshore to this area that we call the Great White Shark Cafe. Not important. Anyways, we have the same sharks come back every year to these small aggregation sites. And great white sharks, the ridging on their dorsal fin is unique, like a thumbprint. And so we see the same sharks coming back. We can recognize them when we see them, and we give them names, and they kind of have their own distinct personalities. So I painted portraits of some of our favorite sharks. This is a shark from a different site down in Baja, but it is of a real shark. It's just not one that I know personally.
Does that make you connect a bit more because that shark is personal?
Yeah, so I actually, the idea for this series came when, so my lab group, we made a documentary for Shark Week. And so we were on the boat one day with the film crew waiting for the sharks, and we were talking about how you change the narrative around sharks, because there is, after Jaws came out, shark populations in the United States just tanked. People started shark fishing in a way that shark meat isn't particularly healthy. It's, if you think tuna's high in mercury, big sharks are next level, they're not good for you. But sport fishing in this country escalated, and there's been this whole societal frenzy around being afraid of sharks. And so we're talking about how do you change that narrative. And we were talking about how much we love Gigi, the 18-foot female, who is the largest shark that anyone's ever seen in Northern California. And I had this idea of, well, what if I made a life-size portrait of Gigi so people could stand in front of this fish and see how beautiful she is. And then I did it. And I had a dealer who was crazy enough to want to show it. So.
Beautiful.
But
is there a white shark nursery off Ventura or off this right near?
Yes, so the babies like to hang out down here. So white sharks are endothermic. They keep their internal body temperature warmer than the ambient water. And so the water's very cold up in Northern California. But the females will come down here and we think give birth, although no one's ever observed that.
Yeah.
And the juveniles will stay down here until they go through puberty, and then they go up to Northern California and start eating elephant seals. It's probably more science than you want.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I have one for Charles. When you're working with colors like this, and you're painting them on, are you ever like looking at the colors that they go with, and the colors are changing, and then you decide, oh, I'm just gonna, do this one a totally different color? Or do you have it in your head what your palette's gonna be before you start? Or
Everything I do is intuitive, and I don't have a color theory or anything like that. I work on lots of paintings at once, and I might have a bunch of black and white paintings, I should make some color paintings, and I'll start them, and a lot of times I'll think, well, I'll paint kind of a red painting. And it was interesting, a couple years ago, I had a long talk with Alex Katz. And he told me that when he starts a painting, whether it's 6 inches or 6 feet or 12 feet, he paints it in one sitting. Because you get into a certain state of mind when you start something, and I can't paint a painting in one day, usually anyway. And so many times I'll have an idea about a color scheme that I'm kind of trying to stick with. I'll start a painting, and then I'll go home, and, I'll come in the next morning, I'll think, well, hell, I don't have to do that. There's no rules, so I can just arbitrarily decide to change it. But the thing is that the color scheme sort of takes on a personality, and so I'll pursue that. And I try some wacko stuff. Like frequently, I'll try to throw something that's just way, you just wouldn't do that. It's against the rules. And but I find that interesting. Like I tell a story about Moses. Ed Moses was a good buddy of mine, and I started these paintings, which were thick brush strokes with oil paint. I scrape them, and I started painting these things. And he came into my studio and said, "Well, these are pretty good paintings." And he said, "Did you ever think about making them in black and white so they're serious?" And I'm making them there, pink, chartreuse, lavender, every color in the world. And I said, "This is a hell of a lot harder to paint than black and white paint. Black and white's simple." Anyway, I make it up as I go along.
How do you know when you finished a work?
It's difficult. The two big questions are where to start and when to stop. And I have been guilty many times of overdoing it because I can't help myself. And that is probably the hardest thing there is stopping. And I have people come to my studio constantly going, "Is that finished? Leave it alone." And I go, "Well, I can't quite leave it alone." It's a tricky one. You just try to listen to the piece, but a lot of times you can't.
Or in my case, you listen to Chuck.
I'll frequently go to her studio and say, "That's finished." Or get rid of that one little sharp area there. It's finished.
I think I already know the answer to the question from what you've been saying, but you have obviously a lot of success in your career. And I'm just wondering, when you do a series and then when you start up something new, does that history of success interfere with making a decision because maybe it won't be good or as good? I don't know. Because that history is there.
First off, I don't feel successful. Okay.
All right.
I mean, I'm lucky and I've been doing really well, but it's the problem of never looking down, always looking up, and art pyramids like this, I don't know where I am, but and all successes don't feel, if I felt satisfied, I could stop and stay there. And to me, I am constantly looking for something new, I guess to challenge myself because I think I'm going to get better. So I don't have fear of starting new stuff. In fact, I get mad if I don't have an idea that I haven't tried yet. That's why I want to make the next step. My problem is getting enough of this stuff done to feel like I've justified and covered that territory.
Mm-hmm.
We should end it on that.